So I very much appreciate the invitation to present today. It's really an honor to give some updates on the clinical trial that we have ongoing. Ethan, many friends I see online, which is great, and looking forward to the discussion. Feel free to interrupt me anytime if you have any questions or comments or anything unclear. I'll try to share with you some of the things that have happened over the last year to keep you informed, as I know that this audience and this group is not only involved, but obviously very interested in this study, which I very much appreciate. So just to give a recap for anyone who's hearing about this for the first time. So endocrine therapy in men with breast cancer, it's complicated, as you probably know. We have the option of using tamoxifen, which is the standard of care for men, and has been the standard of care since essentially the invention of tamoxifen or the discovery of tamoxifen. But as you also know, there are newer and newer endocrine therapies that are being, on the one hand, approved and standard of care in women, and on the other hand, are being explored, mainly in women. And this has created a gap where we have more effective endocrine therapy options in women than tamoxifen, at least in some of them, or most of them. And we're stuck with tamoxifen in men because we don't know of anything else that works equally well or better. And that's why I list here that the efficacy of other agents is unclear, specifically aromatase inhibitors and aromatase inhibitors with gonadal suppression. As you may have heard, aromatase inhibitors are an option that is more effective than tamoxifen in postmenopausal women. And aromatase inhibitors in combination with gonadal suppression, approximately around 2015-ish, to 2016, if I remember right, was when we heard about the results of the SOFT and TEXT trials in premenopausal women, where the use of this combination of aromatase inhibitor with gonadal suppression in premenopausal women led to better survival outcomes than the use of tamoxifen, which used to be the standard of care at that time for premenopausal women. So both of these options have improved outcomes in women, and we still keep using tamoxifen in men, and because we've never tested this in the male population. On top of that, I was mentioning earlier that we are getting a bigger and bigger gap in how we treat breast cancer in men versus in women. And part of that gap now includes targeted agents such as CDK4/6 inhibitors. We've heard about the results of a study called Monarchy, which is the use of abemaciclib first, which was a positive study. And that study did enroll approximately around 36 men that were randomized to abemaciclib versus not, in a study that enrolled a total of approximately 5,000 patients. We also have another study that was reported and recently updated at ESMO as well, the Natalie trial, which evaluated ribociclib. Both of those studies showed positive results for the use of CDK4/6 inhibitors, either abemaciclib or ribociclib, with endocrine therapy. A challenge here is that ribociclib has a relative contraindication black box warning with tamoxifen, which is the option that we know works best in men. So you can see how this also creates a struggle in that we don't know how to best utilize these CDK4/6 inhibitors, which are drugs that are being more and more important in the routine care of men with breast cancer, because we don't know what is the best endocrine therapy backbone. Should we use tamoxifen, which is what we've been using all along, or should we use an aromatase inhibitor or an aromatase inhibitor with gonadal suppression? And lastly, the two trials that I mentioned have not reported the efficacy outcomes for men specifically. The Natalie trial was a bit smaller in terms of the male population. There were approximately 20 men enrolled on Natalie, but neither study has reported the outcomes for men specifically, nor that they had that as a pre-specified reporting endpoint. So Ethan was designed to try to catch up with what we know about endocrine therapy in women today, or at least in the CDK4/6 inhibitor era. And so the questions that we have that we want to answer with this study is whether aromatase inhibitors work in men, whether aromatase inhibitors with gonadal suppression work better than tamoxifen, and whether adding a CDK4/6 inhibitor increase the efficacy of the endocrine therapy backbone. And lastly, which endocrine therapy backbone should we use to combine it with a CK4/6 inhibitor. So obviously, we have a lot of questions to answer. These are pressing questions that we face when we see patients in clinic. And this is the design of the study. Many of you have seen this many times. For those of you who are seeing it for the first time, this is a study that enrolls any man with stage 1 to 3, so operable breast cancer, that is ER/PR positive, HER2 negative. This is approximately 90% to 95% of the male breast cancer population in the United States that is technically eligible for this study. When patients come in, they're offered the study and they're randomized, if they agree to participate, into one of 3 arms, which is the window phase of the study. This is the window of opportunity where we randomize patients to either tamoxifen alone, anastrozole alone, or anastrozole with degarelix. Anastrozole is an aromatase inhibitor, and degarelix is a GnRH antagonist, a medication that blocks GnRH. And by doing this, it does gonadal suppression. Basically, it reduces testosterone. The study aims to enroll a total of 60 men, randomized 1-to-1, we call it, which is basically an equal distribution. So one patient goes here, well, 20 in total here, 20 in total here, and 20 in total here. Patients get treated for 3 weeks, and at the end of the 3 weeks, they go for a biopsy, and this is the research biopsy, the only biopsy that happens in the study. And after the biopsy, patients go on to what is called the neoadjuvant phase. So the neoadjuvant phase, or the treatment before surgery phase, if you will, is made in a way such as that the tamoxifen group, which is 20 men, get split half in half to continue in tamoxifen all along. Tamoxifen is a control arm on the study, which is the standard of care for men. Or the addition of abemaciclib is the second group here, which is another 10 patients. And abemaciclib is a CDK4/6 inhibitor. These 2 groups get merged and get randomized 1-to-1 to continuing anastrozole with degarelix, like arm C, for example, or adding degarelix if they came from arm B. And then the same combination with abemaciclib. So what we're doing here is basically what is called 2-by-2 design. And what we mean by this is that we are exploring the backbone of endocrine therapy being either tamoxifen in these 2 groups or the aromatase inhibitor with gonadal suppression in these 2 groups. That's one thing that we're considering. And the other thing that we're considering is with or without the CDK4/6 inhibitor, in this case, abemaciclib. So we have these 2 groups that have abemaciclib and these 2 groups that don't have the abemaciclib. At the end of the 4 months, patients go for surgery. There are 2 primary endpoints that the study has, and these are co-primary endpoints. The first one is the Ki-67 reduction from the initial biopsy that patients have at diagnosis until the research biopsy for every given participant. And then the second the second primary endpoint is the RCV index, which is the endpoint for the neoadjuvant phase. And just a consideration here is that for anyone who may be curious about this, oftentimes in medicine and in oncology, when there are co-primary endpoints, the study oftentimes is not sure what they're going to improve, whether it is disease-free survival or overall survival or both, for example. And therefore, they put both as co-primary endpoints, hoping that if they hit one, then the study is considered a positive study. But here is different than that. Here we have 2 co-primary endpoints because this is essentially 2 different studies merged into one. So the primary endpoint of the first study, if you will, or what is the first part, is this one, the Ki-67 reduction. And the second endpoint, the second part of the study, primary endpoint, is the RCV index. RCV index stands for Residual Cancer Burden Index. What this is basically a measurement at the time of surgery of how much tumor is still left in place that is resected, taken out by surgery in the surgical specimen, basically. So if the tumor was, say, for example, 5 centimeters in size and shrunk to 2 centimeters in size, well, what's left is 2 centimeters in size that the surgeon took out, and that gets translated into a score, gets converted into a score. The score goes from 0 to 5. And we're measuring how that score changes across the different arms of the study. And the more it changes, the more efficacy the treatment has, of course. So besides the 2 co-primary endpoints, the study has a number of secondary endpoints that we think are very important. One is to evaluate estradiol and testosterone levels, both at baseline and at the end of the window. This is to try to understand what happens physiologically in men who take these treatments, and also to try to explain the efficacy that we see on the study. So the hormone levels should track what the treatment is supposed to be doing. And what's going to be nice about this is that for example, one of the biggest concerns about using aromatase inhibitors alone in men, medications like anastrozole, is that there is this concern that testosterone will remain high, and that because of that, estrogen will remain high, and then the medication will not be effective. That's all a theory. Ethan aims to prove that theory incorrect. We have data, obviously, in the metastatic setting where aromatase inhibitors are known to work and known to work very well in men with breast cancer. But we have to prove it definitively, and we hope to be able to do that with this study. Another endpoint is the PEPI score at surgery. So PEPI is an index that was developed by a very proficient investigator, Matt Ellis, who has been involved in male breast cancer Global Alliance as well. He and others that collaborated with him developed this score where it's basically a similar score to the RCB index, but is specifically designed for endocrine therapy. We debated long and hard whether we should do the RCB index or the PEPI score. The RCB index is better used for chemotherapy more than for endocrine therapy, and the PEPI score is better used for endocrine therapy. And you may wonder, well, so why did we choose the one with chemotherapy if we're actually not using chemotherapy on the trial? And the challenge is that we're using CDK4/6 inhibitors. And CDK4/6 inhibitors, medications like abemaciclib, reduce the Ki67, this marker that we're measuring before we start the CDK4/6 inhibitors. The CDK4/6 inhibitors like abemaciclib reduce this marker by more than 90%. And the PEPI score depends a lot on that marker. So if we use the PEPI score, we're going to get essentially artificially low numbers that we may not know how to interpret. Because when PEPI was developed, it was developed before the use of CDK4/6 inhibitors. Another endpoint is safety, feasibility, and futility. And then we're looking at quality of life across the entire study duration. So I want to share some of the tissues that we're collecting because I want to mention to you some of the updates that we have on the correlative analysis. So we're collecting tissue, both the biopsy at baseline that patients have at diagnosis. This is that diagnostic biopsy, it's not a new biopsy. The window that happens at the end of the window, the biopsy that happens at the end of the window, the surgical specimen that happens when patients go for surgery. These three tissues are collected by the study. We're also collecting blood, regular blood for each cycle, basically blood counts and chemistries. We're measuring the hormones levels, as I mentioned. And we have now formed a very nice collaboration with Dr. Ben Park at Vanderbilt to evaluate ctDNA, which is something that is not quite yet on the living study today, but is a proposed change that we're submitting for an amendment pretty much as we speak to our IRB to get this approved so that we can start collecting ctDNA in patients moving forward as well. And then we look at germline genetic testing, which is done at baseline for patients who choose to have this done, which is the majority of men in the United States and in the study. So what are we trying to do with all of this? So I mentioned some of the endpoints about the hormones and those things. We're going to compare genomics, basically, before and after treatment with abemaciclib and with endocrine therapy. We're going to look at if germline status, so for example, BRCA mutations, if we have any men with BRCA mutations, which is approximately 10 to 15% of the population in the US, if that is a predictor of response. We're going to look at how much the cancer cells die when we use endocrine therapy with or without abemaciclib. And you may wonder, why do we actually care about this? So it turns out that one of the main differences between CDK4/6 inhibitors, between abemaciclib and ribociclib, for example, could be whether those medications cause what is called apoptosis, which is the death of the tumor cells. And abemaciclib, there is the theory that it may cause more killing of the cells than the other CDK4/6 inhibitors. And we're going to do analysis on the samples to do this. Believe it or not, this has actually not been done in women. So this would be an example actually of something that gets done in men for the first time before it actually happens in women in a breast cancer study, at least to my knowledge. We're going to try also to determine the response signatures for endocrine therapy. And what we mean by this is to see if genomically at the gene level, if there are markers in the gene composition of the tumor that are associated with a better response, meaning that if some genes are present, the patient has more benefit or less benefit from the endocrine therapy that we're using. So this is something that has been extensively studied in women, and perhaps the most famous example is Oncotype. We don't have something like that for men, and so this is an opportunity to try to look at those signatures in men as well. We want to dissect the heterogeneity of endocrine therapy response. What we mean by this is try to understand better why it works better in some patients and why it doesn't in others. We want to generate patient-derived organoids and test the function of the estrogen receptor in those organoids to see if we can create a repository to explore drugs in a faster manner than what a clinical trial would require. And then to characterize the mutational profiling and the potential associations with response using ctDNA, as I mentioned, with a collaboration with Ben Park. So this list of things that we're trying to do is thanks to the ongoing, very nice collaboration that we have set up with University of North Carolina, specifically Phil Spanheimer, who's a surgeon who has a lab and with whom we have been fortunate to receive a grant from NIH to do part of the work. Also, thanks to the generosity of Ben Park and the Male Breast Cancer Global Alliance, and I'll get more into this in a second, we've been able to align very important goals that we have and ideas that we want to develop to find answers in male breast cancer. And this is really, for us, it's really a tremendous opportunity. And I want to thank, in this part of the talk at least, the TBCRC. And so the TBCRC is a consortium of institutions, academic institutions in the United States, that is the platform that runs the ETHAN clinical trial. And I want to thank them not only for helping us run the study, but also because they help create the collaborations as well. It's a very collaborative group where I have had a really incredibly good experience learning from them and being able to share my ideas and get feedback. So I want to give you an update on the current status of the study. Fortunately, we have enrolled 18 patients to this date. One of those 18 is actually being randomized today. One more patient, so that will be patient number 19, is in screening. The trial is now open at the 7 sites that we intended to open originally, and those are listed here on the slide. I'm going to mention them out in case anyone lives near these sites or a friend of anyone lives near here. So Dana-Farber being one of them in Boston, MD Anderson in Houston, Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota, University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill, University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia, University of Pittsburgh, in Pittsburgh obviously, and Georgetown University in the DC and DC metro area. We're planning to open the study at 2 more sites, and this is thanks to the very generous support from an anonymous donor through the Male Breast Cancer Global Alliance. These sites will be Vanderbilt and Mayo in Jacksonville. And with that, I want to take the opportunity to thank both the donor for the generosity and the Male Breast Cancer Global Alliance for really trusting us in the opening of the study in 2 more sites. We are hoping that this will help us enroll patients faster and also make the study more geographically available for patients who may want to participate but may not be able to travel to a far distance. So we're very excited about this opportunity. This has also generated the opportunity for the collaboration with Ben Park and his work on the ctDNA. And we think that a lot is going to come from this, not just for the ETHAN trial, but even for the future, and including us being able to help Dr. Park with his efforts on metastatic breast cancer, which are really, really important as well. So thank you so much. There are a lot of great news, and there are a few issues that I wanted to mention to the group today. One is that enrollment is happening, but it is slower than anticipated. And I don't want to be a Debbie Downer with this because I feel like it's already a huge success to have enrolled 18 men with breast cancer to a study that is evaluating male breast cancer specifically. But we still have work to be done. So essentially, we enrolled almost 1/3 of the study population, which is fantastic. But we were hoping that the whole enrollment would take 3 years. And we have seen that the enrollment is slower than we anticipated. And there are obviously reasons for that, right? Like, when we have to put a number of the enrollment time that we expect, we often put that number thinking that all the sites are going to be up and running, and it takes at minimum a year for studies to open. So it's not that everyone is on the same page from the very beginning. We have, Dana-Farber was the only open site for essentially a year at the first year of the study. So we are optimistic that things are going to keep moving along. When I presented this talk last year, as I was looking at the slides from last year, we had 8 men enrolled. So we have made a good progress, but we're very ambitious to get this done as soon as possible. Patients and the community, overall, the world overall, needs the answers to these questions pretty urgently. So we really want to get this done as soon as possible to be able to share the final results with everybody. So if you wonder, what can you do to help us? So I put here a few ideas. And so one is, if you have social media and you like to post on social media, feel free to do so. I put every 2 months, but you could do it as often as you want. It helps a lot, believe it or not. So spreading the word as much and as wide as you can, either via social media or letting a friend that you may know about the study, or oncologists. The more we spread the word, the better it is. And one of the things that we probably all have figured out about social media is that it's pretty narrow in time, in that, if you post it once, people read it, but the people who are diagnosed, 6 months later or a year later don't know about it, just as much as the people before them didn't. So if you would like to, and if you're able to post it, we will very much appreciate it. The other thing is that if you come across any man who has a new diagnosis of breast cancer, let them know that there is a study, and let me know. I list my email on the slide. I'm going to put it on the chat as well, so that everyone has it, and hopefully people can see the chat. So feel free to say my email, and let me know if you have any patient who's diagnosed with breast cancer. Ideally, you want to ask permission from the patient first before letting me know, because these are obviously confidential things. But if the patient gives you permission, I would love to be able to talk with them about the study. Sherry has championed a lot of this, actually, and it has helped a lot to be able to let people know of this, patients especially, obviously, but even people in their families, because a lot of men are used to just doing what they're told. And so if a physician sees the patient and says, okay, we're going to plan your surgery for this date, and then we'll go from there, many men will be like, okay, that's what I'm supposed to do, and I'm just going to go with that. And that, kind of like executing orders, basically. And there's nothing wrong with that, to be honest with you. But the part that saddens me is that it's a missed opportunity for them to learn about the study, and it could be something that really could help patients a lot, because one of the things that I have learned in the patients that we have treated on Ethan is that it has actually helped us inform the treatment that happens after surgery for patients on the study. Meaning, what I mean by this is that based on how patients respond to endocrine therapy, we can know what will help them afterwards. And not just based on the efficacy of the treatments, like how well it works, but also the side effects. If they have too many side effects with the medication, well, maybe they may want to do a different type of medication after surgery, or not, right? It generates more information that is helpful for everybody, including the patients as well. So a couple of reminders that I wanted to share with you as you are thinking about this for yourselves and for any friend or person that you may come across that may be interested in the study. So there are no placebos on the study. So there is no use of any drug that has no efficacy, or that is trying to trick people into a pill that essentially is a placebo. The control arm, in fact, is actually the standard of care. It's tamoxifen. So at minimum, if you will, patients will be getting the tamoxifen. There is not a placebo comparison. Also, this is not a first-in-human study. In fact, we are using the drugs that have been most effective in women to this date to assess if they work at minimum equally well in men. If all we learn from this study is that they work just as much as tamoxifen, it's already a huge win. And the reason is because the side effect profile of these medications in men is very different than in women. Specifically, aromatase inhibitors are medications that are actually very appealing for the male population, as the risks of osteoporosis are essentially minimal to non-existent. And the risk of side effects with hot flashes and other symptoms are actually very low with aromatase inhibitors in men as compared with tamoxifen. So even if they work equally well, just having the confidence that something else works beyond tamoxifen not only is a huge peace of mind for patients, but it's also an important tool to be able to offer to patients so that we can complete the 5 years of endocrine therapy in a reasonable manner. Because one of the things that we have learned from important studies that have been done in Europe is that approximately 40 to 50% of men are able to finish 5 years of tamoxifen, which is really sad. In women, the numbers are essentially in the 70% range for endocrine therapy in women. And you may say, why is that? Is there so much difference, right? Well, one of the reasons is because if you only have one option in men, if that option brings you problems, it's less likely that you will go to a different option to finish the 5 years. And it's more likely for men that you may end endocrine therapy there. Whereas in women, we have a couple of options to try, not only 3 aromatase inhibitors, but also tamoxifen and so on and so forth. Few other reminders. The study is what is called open label. What this means is that when patients get randomized on the study, meaning when patients go through these groups, patients know from the very beginning which groups they're going to be assigned to. This happens after the randomization, of course. So patients have to agree to participate with no one knowing which group they're going to be assigned to. But once they say, yes, I want to participate, and the randomization gets done, the result of the randomization, meaning which group they are assigned to, gets notified to the patient immediately and to the physicians that are treating the patient immediately. So everyone knows what they're getting. And this is helpful because the point that I was making earlier, that if you have a lot of efficacy of the treatment and you're wondering what the treatment was, you will know because it's disclosed to you. If you have certain side effects, also you will know which medications are causing it because you also know which treatments you're getting. So two other points that I sometimes forget to mention, but I think are very important. One is that the cost of the research biopsy is covered by the study because it's a research biopsy, and that 2 of the drugs, which are actually the 2 expensive drugs on the study, the Garelix and abemaciclib, are provided free of charge by the study. Tamoxifen and anastrozole are not provided free of charge, although those medications are cheaper than aspirin, actually. So last but not least, I want to thank a lot of people that have helped us to get this going and to make sure that it continues to go. The study team is listed on the left. It's a large number of people that have helped me a lot and that have helped the study a lot in thinking hard through how to try to design the best study possible. The Male Breast Cancer Global Alliance, Sherry, obviously, for her immense support, and Michael Singer. Michael Singer is a patient advocate for the study and has helped us to get funding, to spread the word internally and externally when we were designing the study and when we were trying to convince funding agencies to help us support the study. I want to, from the bottom of my heart, thank BCRF. I owe them my professional career. BCRF is the Breast Cancer Research Foundation, and BCRF has funded Ethan so that Ethan will be able to open and get started. And that was not a trivial investment of funds and also of trust. Them trusting us in doing this is really super exciting for me, very, very much an honor. And it's really, without them, we wouldn't be able to do this. So if you ever come across with anyone from BCRF, and I know some in the call have already several times, if you could extend the thank you to them on my behalf, and if you feel happy about this getting done on your behalf as well, that would mean a lot because they are doing something that a lot of people, including industry and others, would not necessarily want to do. And by this, I mean doing research in the male breast cancer population. Other funders that we were very excited to get, including ASCO, the Concave Cancer Foundation, NIH, as I mentioned earlier, and both the Male Breast Cancer Global Alliance and the donor working with them. Thank you. And happy to take any questions.
And I have some for you. Let me see. Who is eligible to join the Ethan trial, and how can a newly diagnosed male breast cancer patient find out if he qualifies?
Yes, so that's a great question, actually. Very briefly, the patients who are eligible to participate are men who are diagnosed with breast cancer that is not metastatic, meaning that is not stage 4. So it has to be stage 1, 2, or 3. Metastatic to the lymph nodes is okay, so because that can be stage 2 or stage 3, but it cannot be stage 4. That is one of the main elements of it. The other one, and this is very important, is that patients have to not have received any treatment of any kind. So no surgery to either the breast or the lymph nodes, no endocrine therapy, no chemotherapy before starting the study. And this is because the main endpoint that we're measuring at the very beginning is the Ki-67, and the Ki-67 gets affected by treatments. And also the RCB index requires the tissue to be taken out at the end of the study. So if the tissue was already taken out by surgery from the beginning, then we have no tissue to test. So essentially, in short, is any man who's diagnosed with breast cancer that is ER positive who hasn't had treatment yet. And that's the key. That second part, the no treatment yet, is the key part, because that's the part that often gets forgotten. And we get approached sometimes by patients or oncologists or anybody about a patient who has already had surgery. And we unfortunately, as much as we wish we could, we unfortunately cannot enroll them on the study. If anyone is wondering why is that the case, is because if we were to enroll patients that had surgery already, then instead of 60 men, 60, we would need at least 2,000 to 5,000 men. And I'm not joking about this. This is the sample size of the Natalie trial, the Monarchy trial that tested the CDK4/6 inhibitors. It's also the sample size of the studies that tested aromatase inhibitors versus tamoxifen in women. There were a couple thousand patient trials, the ATAC trial and Big 198 and so on and so forth. So the testing of these medications while the tumor is still in the body gives an enormous amount of power in that we can reduce the sample size literally to 60 and still find out the answers.
Okay. What makes the Ethan trial different from current standard treatments that men are already receiving for breast cancer?
Yes, it's a good question as well. So right now, what the textbook says is that men are supposed to get tamoxifen for 5 years. And that was what the textbook said 10 years ago, and 20 years ago, and 30 years ago, and 40 years ago. And I think in part because of that is why we have not improved survival in men with breast cancer over the last 30 plus years. In women, back then, that was the treatment that we did. But even though tamoxifen was still used for women, we now use it in fewer instances now today compared to 10 years ago and even 20 years ago and so on and so forth. So what's different from what we're doing today? One is giving the opportunity to test drugs that work better than tamoxifen, at least in the female population and possibly in the male population as well. The other option is that if you blindly go, not participating on the study on Ethan, but outside of the study, if you go with one of these options as the treatment of choice for men with breast cancer, specifically, for example, using aromatase inhibitors, well, we don't know how well they work in a definitive manner, right? And it's a big commitment because it's a 5-year treatment, and you wouldn't, or at least I wouldn't, want to go on a 5-year plan without knowing if that plan is better, equal, or worse than tamoxifen, which to this date, we still don't know. Ethan, the advantage that it has is that it measures the activity essentially in real time, because we can see the tumors shrink in real time as patients are receiving the treatment. And the treatment is only limited to essentially a 5 month duration, essentially, almost a 5 month duration. So it's not that it's a commitment of the entire treatment plan for that particular patient.
Okay. Will joining this clinical trial give male patients access to newer or more advanced therapy options than they could get otherwise?
Yeah, that's a great question, because actually these medications are all approved already for women and men with breast cancer. They're the standard of care for women. There is one exception, and I forgot to mention about this: the Garlex, the medication that we're using, the GnRH antagonist that we're using. That medication is not approved for breast cancer in women or men. It is a medication that is approved for men with prostate cancer. And what I mean by approved is approved by the FDA. We use the Garlex on the study because the Garlex makes the testosterone go down in only 2 days, whereas medications like Lupron and similar medications that we often use in women and men, those medications take 1 month to make the testosterone go down. So the study will need to be extended by another month, basically, the window part of it, especially if we were to use Lupron. And we did not want to take the window so long. So that's why we wanted to use a medication that works a lot faster, in this case, the Garlic. Mechanistically, though, they are very similar. There is studies that have been done with the Garlics in women, phase 2 studies, that show similar efficacy than Lupron and other agents in women. Somehow the company never chased an approval for the manufacturer of the Garlics, never chased an approval for breast cancer specifically, but it is a drug that is pretty common in prostate cancer. So technically, because these drugs are all approved essentially, and you could substitute the Garlics with Lupron and do the same treatment, basically. Technically, you could do these treatments as standard of care, or at least, I shouldn't say as standard of care, but at least outside of the clinical trial. Again, the challenge with that is that we don't learn from that, none of us, including the patient that is doing the treatment, because if presumably the patient does that treatment after surgery, then we don't know whether the tumor will have shrunk or not, right? And by how much, and so on and so forth.
True. What are the possible risks or side effects of the endocrine therapies being tested in the Ethan trial?
Yes. So tamoxifen, I think, is a drug that probably most of you are familiar with. It has side effects that are similar to both women and men in, risk of hot flashes, menopausal symptoms. Those symptoms are pretty similar between men and women. But there are a few that are actually different between men and women. One is the risk of blood clots. So technically, it's a similar side effect that both women and men can get blood clots on tamoxifen, but men inherently have a higher tendency to develop blood clots than women. And some studies have reported the risk of blood clots with tamoxifen to be as high as 9%. The other side effect that tamoxifen can cause in men is erectile dysfunction and loss of libido. Loss of libido can happen in women as well, but erectile dysfunction is a pretty unique side effect for men. And then men on tamoxifen can develop a side effect of muscle fatigue that is pretty unique, that women haven't reported as much. Men on tamoxifen sometimes feel like they basically did a lot of exercise and they got tired from doing a lot of exercise. Is that sensation of muscle fatigue after intense exercise? But they feel that without having done the exercise, right? And so those are the side effects of tamoxifen. Anastrozole in women can cause hot flashes and menopausal symptoms, which is something that men do not experience for the most part. It's very rare for men to have those symptoms on anastrozole. That alone makes it very appealing. But on top of that, anastrozole does not have a risk of blood clots, and it has a risk of osteoporosis, but primarily in women, because women don't have high levels of testosterone, which men do. And the testosterone levels on anastrozole continue to stay high, on anastrozole alone I'm talking, continue to stay high, and therefore that prevents the risk of osteoporosis for men. So it has zero risk virtually of osteoporosis in men, unless the patient had what is called hypogonadism before the diagnosis or something like that, when the levels of hormones are low. In that case, then yes, there is a risk of osteoporosis. But it's a very attractive option because men virtually have no side effects from aromatase inhibitors. The Garlix, though, is a very different story. The Garlix is a medication that will put men in menopause, essentially, and will reduce the testosterone to essentially zero. And with that, it will cause hot flashes. It will bring menopausal symptoms, almost as a guarantee. Nothing in medicine is a guarantee, but it's very high. The chances of that happening is very high. Because of that, it also can cause technically a risk of osteoporosis, although we only use it for essentially 4 or 5 months. And so therefore, the risk of osteoporosis is trivial for the study. And abemaciclib, the biggest risks are diarrhea, which is controlled by Imodium or loperamide, and also a risk of blood clots with abemaciclib. The risk of blood clots is relatively low. And also, I want to remind the audience that I feel like I've said this a lot, but it's really important to always keep it in mind, is that the treatment is essentially almost 5 months long. So the risk of having a blood clot during that period of time is very, very, very low. Oftentimes people will ask, the combination of tamoxifen, which is a medication that technically can cause blood clots, and abemaciclib, which is also a medication that can cause blood clots. Is that a problem? Well, so that was actually what Monarchy did, the trial that evaluated this medication. But Monarchy was a treatment that lasted for 2 years, right? Here is only essentially for almost 5 months. So those are the side effects overall.
Okay. I think you answered part of this next question, but how long does participation in the trial last, and how often would a patient need to travel for appointments or testing?
Yes. So how long the participation of the study lasts is essentially 5 months from the beginning till the end being the date of surgery. How many visits? That's a very good question, because the study, I feel, has built very few visits. Essentially, what happens is that patients get seen the very first time, of course. Then the next time they start the treatment, assuming they sign the consent and agree to participate, obviously. Then they start the treatment, the next visit. And then from there, they get seen 4 more times, once a month. And then they have the surgery and they're done. So it's a total of 5, 6 visits total for the whole study.
Okay. Does the trial cost anything for participants, and will insurance cover related exams, scans, and medications?
Yeah, that's a good question. So for people who travel from far, there could be the traveling costs, of course. People who don't have to travel far, then obviously they don't incur those costs. There is no cost to patients that would not be covered by either the insurance or the trial, outside of out-of-pocket co-insurances, things like that insurance may have, right? But basically, everything on the study should be covered by insurance, including the visits. There is no need for imaging, actually. The study doesn't require imaging. It uses the images that are already done as part of the standard of care. And those should be covered by the insurance, of course. The 2 things that don't get covered by insurance that are covered by the study, so they come with no cost for patients. One is the biopsy, the research biopsy that happens at the end of the window. And the other one is the medications that we use, the Degarelix and the abemaciclib. So the Degarelix is not FDA approved. So we could technically potentially try to have it covered by insurance, and probably it will be covered by insurance, but we don't even want to run the risk. And we basically provide it free of charge for patients, thanks to the support from BCRF. And the other one is the abemaciclib. And abemaciclib now, when the study was designed, was before abemaciclib was actually approved for use in early stage breast cancer. Now it's approved, so technically it will be covered by, but we still actually provide it free of charge. Abemaciclib is actually a pretty expensive medication. Even with insurance, it can be expensive, depends on the insurance and all that. So that one is provided free of charge as well.
Okay. Men that have participated and gone to surgery, have you seen the tumor shrink the majority of the time?
So that is a very good question. So unfortunately, I can't disclose the results that we have seen so far on the study for a couple of reasons. First is because there is the fear, and I'm not talking about Ethan specifically, I'm talking about clinical trials in general. There is a fear that if we report results early, meaning, say, for example, we enroll the first 20 patients and we say, we're going to report what happened to the first 20. A risk with that is that if everyone has a tremendous success, and in truth, the study is not a successful study at the very end, you run the risk of giving false hope to people. Also, if you happen to have bad luck and you have a couple of instances where there are the opposite of success, I guess failures, you may be tempted to think we should shut down the study, basically. What I can tell you is that the study gets reviewed twice a year by what is called the Data Safety Monitoring Board, which is a committee of people that review the study for safety and for efficacy, and they would shut down the study. We're actually next week, well, November 6th, I think it is. We have our upcoming meeting is going to be the fourth one. And they would close the study if they notice any concerns. And thankfully that hasn't happened, of course. We're very excited about what we have seen so far on the study. I wish I could tell you more, but if we can borrow 41 more men, we can report it.
Have to keep posting on social media.
The other thing also, just to add to that, is that, and thank you, Sherry, for doing that. I really appreciate it, actually. Just to add to what I just said, is that the million-dollar question is, which is the winner? Is it tamoxifen that should remain as the standard of care, and the other ones work just as well or more? And in which case, which one works better? Is it just the aromatase inhibitor alone, or is it with the degarlix, right? Like, ultimately, we want to know the final answer. And the final answer truly requires 60 men. So we won't be able to, we could tell you like a general broad assessment, but that's not entirely helpful for the patient who's making a decision about their treatment where they have to choose one treatment.
Yeah, it's nice to have options. I just got another one. Let's see. Will trial participants be able to continue their regular treatments and doctor relationships while enrolled in the study?
Yes, so we actually have two patients, two men that have seen me, and one that has been seen outside of Dana-Farber, who came to do the study, did the study, and they are not coming to Dana-Farber anymore, at least the two that I have seen. Not because they had a bad experience or anything like that, in fact, quite the opposite, but because they live far away and they didn't want to come. They were very happy with participating. They were extremely happy after participating on the study, but they wanted to do their surgery with the surgeon that they met first. And then they wanted to continue with the medical oncologist that they had met initially, obviously, that is closer to home for them and more convenient, of course. And all of that is allowed by the study. The only thing that the study requires is that patients get seen for those 5 or 6 visits in total. That's the only thing that the study requires. But the surgery can happen anywhere. The radiation can happen anywhere if they need radiation afterwards. The treatment after the surgery, whatever that may be, whether chemotherapy needs to be done or whether anything else, like endocrine therapy, whatever, all of those can be done by the initial oncologist. And all of those treatments, by the way, are by the choosing of the patient and the doctors doing those treatments. So the study doesn't require that patients have to go for mastectomy, yes or yes, or chemotherapy, yes or yes, or tamoxifen afterwards, or any of that. It's basically up to the discretion of patients and doctors.
Well, it's definitely exciting
Thank you.
hear this, and we're happy to keep going. I don't have any more questions at this time, but if they come in, I will send them to you and we will get them answered to everyone. But thank you so much, Pablo, for your time, and thank you for all you're doing, and look forward to further updates on Ethan.
Thank you, Sherry. Thanks, everyone. I appreciate the interest and the time.